Hello, everyone. My name is Lav, and I'm a third year sociology student here at Queen's University, and I'm the current Queenston Alumni Marketing and Communications Director. Here with me, I have Caroline Marful. Hi, Caroline, how are you?
Hi, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm pretty good. For those watching, do you want to let us know a bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. So, hi, as Love said, I'm Caroline. I am currently a 2L at Queen's Law, but before deciding to come to law school, I did my undergrad at Queen's in political studies. I was really involved on campus. I loved it. And then I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do next. So I worked for a year for the government. And then I went to grad school and I studied comparative politics at LSE. And then I was sure I was ready to go to law school. And then I came back to Queens and I'm pursuing my degree. So that's a bit of my backstory.
Okay, amazing.
Mhm.
We'll get right into it because there is a lot to unpack with like applications and law school itself.
Absolutely.
Um, So, for those who don't know, Caroline is a first generation student. So am I. So, I know a lot of people can relate to this. How does applying for law school for a first gen student differ from the average student?
Yeah. So I would like the record to show I'm a first gen law student. So my
Awesome.
parents did go to university, which is a privilege in and of itself. But in terms of law school, I will say there was a bit of a mystique around it. I feel as though like I went to the events to figure out about the law schools. I read the descriptions, and yet I felt like anytime I asked current law students or even Queen's alum about the differing law schools and what they were good at, everyone had all this knowledge I didn't yet know. And so I think for first gen students, whether it's first gen completely or just law school, I think it's really imperative to kind of hear the experiences of people who have already gone through it, because it wasn't until I started having discussions that I realized that certain law schools are known for certain things. And I feel like when you're reading their websites, of course, every school tries to make themselves seem like they're the best at absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But there's like a word on the street. And so I feel like making sure you're getting that, which is generally a source of privilege as well, I think that's a really different thing because those insights might not just originally be there. You really have to go out and find it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree because in like researching, like all of them say like we're all good at like every single stream of law, but like, like not everyone could be good at every single thing. So
Yeah.
that is good advice to go outside the website and Google and try and connect. During the application process, what do you think was the most important part to focus on, or the most important aspect, regardless of first gen status?
Yeah, so I actually really struggled in terms of knowing whether it was kind of my grades or my LSAT or my statement that was the most critical part of the application. I like to write, and so I think I spent like way too much time on my statements when I should have been practicing logic games a bit more.
Mhm.
And so I think for everyone applying, I would just very much say try and get every part of your application to the best you can. I think it's the reality that someone might be excellent at the LSAT and like an okay writer, whereas someone else's life experiences may be what's furthering their desire to go into law, and their statement will be really powerful. And then like they just couldn't get logic games like I couldn't. And so I would say you shouldn't put your eggs in one basket in any part of your application. But it differs with law schools as well. So depending on where you're applying, like some are more holistic, some are less so. And so kind of just making sure everything is as great as it can be, because I look in hindsight and I kind of think like I could have probably spent a little less time like rewriting this paragraph the 29th time and like gotten in a few more practice tests with the LSAT.
I know that's such good advice too, because sometimes we even research about like, oh, what I should focus on. It's not all that accurate. So definitely
Yeah.
not putting all your eggs in one basket is a good way to go. Going back to the topic of first gen and women and like people of color in general, is there something they
Absolutely.
should know when applying to law school, or like tips and like tricks they should kind of keep in mind?
I mean, I would say you and I'm sure many others know that like our experiences aren't a monolith. And like I think it's kind of having the mentality that whatever is driving you to go to law school is a good enough reason for you to want to go. I feel like sometimes there's the pressure that like if you're going to law school and you're at intersections of marginalized identities, like you must go and you must change the world. And like this gift you've been given is yours to take and give to everyone and like change the world by the time you're 29. And like it's a lot of pressure. It's very stressful. And it's like following your heart is great enough. And like in the statements that you write and what you pursue during your time in law school, like you respond to no one but yourself and like your own desires and your own motivation. And I feel like that's a perspective that I wish I had heard more and I had to internalized more while I was applying. Like whatever makes you want to go to law school, you can go, you can be great at it. You are smart, you are ready, just go for it.
Yeah, that actually like is a good thing to know, because I guess a lot of people like us have this pressure to, yeah, like go change the world and like don't look back and just keep go go go. But there is an aspect where like you do have to do it for yourself, and that's a good thing to keep in mind. Any like overall tips on the application process, just like in general, whether
My
it be
thing
nitty
with the,
gritty or in general?
it's so mysterious. Like I would say, like I followed the textbook, go to the event to the law school, hear what they're talking about, read their website in and out, talk to students who have gone to the law school, get people to read over your applications. And like obviously I would pass along all of that advice, but like I still didn't, I don't know what worked and what didn't, what was helpful and what wasn't. And so I would just say make sure someone else looks at your application, because like what you think is your best lens might not be the most interesting one for a law school to read. And actually, one piece of advice I will pass along, I went to an event and an admissions person from one of the law schools mentioned that like law school is academically rigorous. And as someone who did so many extracurriculars and kind of, I don't know, had my identity linked to those, they were very much like, no, like it's an academic program. Like you're going to law school to study to be a lawyer. And so when you're talking about the skills you're bringing, use all your life experiences, but use them to show why you'll be an excellent law student and why that would lead you to be an excellent lawyer. And I think Queens is so amazing about being holistic and like helping you develop all your different skills. But kind of when you're applying law school, you have to get into the mindset that like they want academically strong students to succeed and be like lawyers who know what's going on. And I think that wasn't a lens I really had until I went to that event.
Yeah, I think that's a lens that a lot of students don't have and might like lead them to like miss the mark of applications, because they're like,
Yeah.
oh, like I'm going to come in and start this club and that club, but it's like that's not what they really want. They want you to succeed and become a lawyer. They don't need an extra club, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So yeah, that definitely does help, and should help a lot of students. There's obviously a big difference between law school and undergrad. Aside from all like the common like increased course load, increased pace, what are some major differences you found that aren't commonly known or that you weren't expecting going into law school?
Yeah. So I think a difference I wasn't expecting, like I studied politics and I took quite a few history courses. So that was kind of the background I came in with. And the way in which you learn in law school is kind of focused on case law and really like applied. And like, I don't know, I love to give my take and like my lens on issues. And I remember the very first paper I handed in, my prof was so kind, but he was kind of like, what was the rule from the case? Like, how would this be applied? Like, you missed that. You gave your interpretation of it, but you didn't really go through like how this functions in the world. And I think, yeah, I think for change makers, it's kind of a differing perspective that law school brings. Like, you're not necessarily learning every single day how to change the entire world around you. You're learning how the world currently operates and like the rules behind it. And it's a new perspective. And then it even transfers over into the extracurricular experience, wherein like a lot of things that people are doing are like helping them develop skills for going into a career in a certain thing. And so, yeah, that was just kind of a shift that sounds obvious, but for some reason I wasn't anticipating. I was ready to give like my hot takes on the law, and like now I had to learn it first. And so, yeah, I think that was a difference that I could have been better prepared for.
Yeah, no, and I think you get so used to doing it for 4 years or even more of just like giving your take on issues, especially like people in arts and science who are like, oh yeah, like give your like analysis on this, like politics, sociology. all that jazz, you can get like super used to it in your writing style. And I
Exactly.
guess the shift is something that isn't expected. So that's a really good thing to note down for people going into law school. Did you feel the need to pull back from extracurriculars because of the increased academic? And did you find any guilt in pulling back, being a super involved student, and then might maybe having to reduce that involvement?
Yeah, so I most certainly pulled back. I think anything except my full schedule would have been a pulled back version in terms of extracurriculars when I came to law school. But in terms of guilt, I can't say I felt it because truthfully, like I struggled academically when I first came to law school. Like I found it tough, I found it new, it was something different. And like I needed to dedicate the hours to figure out what was going on in class. And like I think the other thing is like when you're going into like a professional trade, like I want to be a great lawyer. I want to know what I'm talking about, like when I'm talking to clients, and I want to be able to help people. And that's kind of the lens I approached it with, like that, like I need to learn so I can be great at this, so I can then contribute in the ways I want to. And if that means my involvement on campus looks different than it was before, that doesn't mean it's bad or like I've let people down. That just means I'm preparing to help other people in different ways. And like I still did get involved, and like I don't imagine life where I couldn't, but or I wouldn't. But it definitely wasn't the same as undergrad. And like I think that's something people ought to prepare for, that like even if you're involved in student government in law school, my experience at Queen's Law at least, it's nowhere near like ASUS AMS life. Like no one is there all the hours of the day, like people are in the library, so it's definitely a different speed.
Yeah, and honestly, that should help a lot of people because I feel like there might be an expectation where you have to be the same person going in, like super involved in like three clubs and student government, but you don't have to. And like you said before, you got to do it for yourself. You have to do law school for yourself and like help other people. So that'll really help a lot of people switch their mindset at least to be like, you don't have to be the exact same person extracurricular wise in undergrad and in law school.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing also interest wise, right? Like I feel like when I was in undergrad, I took quite a few courses in one realm, and then I came to law school and something else really intrigued me. And like when you're spending that much time and that much money, like you follow your heart, you figure out who you get to grow into, like you get to be someone new, you know. I'm still at Queens, but who I was during undergrad and law school, they're so far apart.
Yeah, of course. Switching a bit to dealing with the stress of law school and, of course, applications and waiting to hear back. What are some things that you did to like deal with this stress and, kind of not lose your mind throughout the entire process and right now, like in law school? So, what have you personally done and what pieces of advice would you give to anyone out there?
Yeah, so I'll start with the waiting to hear back from law school. It's long, it's a couple months there that you're waiting. I actually really found solace in community, not necessarily people who applied the same year as I did, but rather people who I knew who applied a few years older than me. And like saying to them, like, the apps are in, I haven't heard, I'm very stressed, I'm very scared. And like having people who are proof that like it's possible and you make it anyways. And like, you know, I have friends now who are now applying to law school and they're waiting by the phone. And I'm like, I get it. Like, let's watch a movie, let's do something else, get your mind off of it. But it's also okay to accept that like you're stressed because it's something that matters to you and it's something that you want. So kind of holding space for the stress, but still finding ways to keep it healthy and making sure you're communicating and like getting it out of the system. And in terms of law school, managing that stress, it's hard. It's hard. I feel like I strive to have balance in my life. And I also really value people in my life who keep me accountable to the balance of my life. You know, like my family, my friends, they've been very strong in saying, like, you know what, like, there's a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Reading every page 3 times will not help you. Like being well rested will help you. And also just keeping the larger goal in mind, I feel like is something that has really helped me manage the stress. Like if something is so difficult, I'm not fully understanding it. How much do I need to understand it? to pass and be okay? And like, can I read this again later? Can I ask questions later? Like, the end of a course doesn't have to be the end of your learning. And so, kind of keeping that in mind, I think has helped me manage the stress a little more. And some things make sense the next year. Like, there were things I learned in 1L that I didn't fully get until finishing a different course in 2L. And like, I keep all my notes and all my books, and like, I make little notes of those things. And so, just letting things evolve. I know you can't get it all right away all the time, I think has really helped me with the stress.
And I think that's also so helpful because obviously, like when you're an undergrad applying to law school or just like before applying to law school, you get so fixated on the numbers of everything of like, oh, is my GPA like 0.05 off or like my LSAT score is like 2 marks off. So I guess like you carry that in with law school and like, yeah, you kind of do need to let go of the number aspect. Just like, I can learn this later. Like you said,
Yeah.
carrying it from 1L to 2L, you can learn it later. It's not that big of a deal. So that definitely will help with the stress aspect, just like letting go of the numbers and all that too. Um, a lot of students applying to law school and those who are in law school deal with a lot of imposter syndrome of not feeling good enough and thinking that, oh, like I'm not going to get this internship or I'm not going to get into this law school. Did you deal with the same thing? And what are some things you did to kind of either distract your mind from it or just deal with it head on?
Yeah, so I definitely had insecurities about like whether I would get into law school, and once I arrived in law school, whether I'd be good at it, and then like whether I would land the job I wanted. Like at every phase, I think there's a high level of self doubt, but I think something that has really helped me navigate that, and it's oh, I have to give credit to my mother. Honestly, she's the one that taught me this, but she always says like from time immemorial, law school has been for people who finished their undergrad and like applied. And so it has to be someone, and why can't it be you? And like look at the backgrounds of people who have made it. And like, don't you have some of those same qualities? Aren't you willing to work that hard? So why can't it be you? And I think that's a lens I've really walked through it. Like it won't be you all the time for anything in life, but it can be you. And like when you work hard and you've put in the time and you've like networked, it might be you, and sometimes it is you. And I feel like I've found that to be true. And I think a tip I would give people is that like most things aren't as mysterious as they seem. It's just you haven't been exposed to the knowledge source yet. You know, like I had a tutor in my 1L year, and the way this woman like helped me understand how to study law, like my marks would have been infinitely worse if I had tried to figure it out on my own without like resources of how like people learn in law school or even participating in the job recruit. Like if I had written my cover letters in the font that I thought looked nice, that wouldn't have gone well. It was when I sent it to people and they told me like, ooh, maybe XYZ thing could be a little different. And so, yeah, I think everyone's a bit of an imposter. Everyone's figuring it out a little bit, and being okay with that kind of helps you through.
Yeah, and I love how you or your mom advised of like changing the narrative almost of like why can't it be instead of like why
Yeah.
it shouldn't be you. 'Cause what most
Yeah.
people think like, oh, I can't be a lawyer because XYZ, but like why can't you be a lawyer because you are XYZ. So that really will help shift people's lives entirely basically with dealing with imposter syndrome. So that's really amazing. Um, Kind of going into the end portion of law school. I know you're not there quite yet. You still have one more year. But based off of what you've seen from others or like networking wise, most people transition to the legal industry through
Right.
articling, landing internships, taking the bar. What are some maybe non-traditional ways you've seen people kind of approach this? And what are some tips you have like in general, like the transition process that you've gotten from others?
Yeah. So I will say I don't personally know many people who have taken non-traditional routes, but I have researched it. So I can tell you some like thoughts I have about that. You know, just because you've done a JD and you've gone to law school doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a lawyer to make the most of the training that you now have. Like I think there are a lot of things you could do in the NGO space that are really powerful. You can also go back to school. Like you can go get a PhD or an SJD and become a scholar of something you're already passionate about and kind of study the intersections of that and law. And I haven't seen as many in Canada, but in the United States, and I'm sure abroad in other places, there's so many jobs that like love to hire people with JDs that have very little to do with law. Like I imagine that like there's a legal aspect and knowing legal frameworks aids you, but I think what law school does is it gives you a really great understanding of how to reason and logic, and like it kind of makes you even more aware of the structures of society. Like I'm someone who just finds that interesting, who reads that, but like law school has like opened my mind in a different way, and I think that kind of knowledge is powerful no matter where you are in whatever space you're in. And so I don't think that anyone should feel obligated to follow the narrow classic path of going to law
Mhm.
school and like working on Bay Street, et cetera, et cetera. Like that wasn't my goal, particularly when I came in, and I don't know where my life will end up long term. So, yeah, there's no path. There's only your path. Like there's the path you pick, and that's the path, you know? So,
Yeah, and it's really good that you did mention about going back to school and not taking a legal job, because I feel like you get your JD and you're so like, okay, I can only be a lawyer and I already spent 7 years in school. Why am I going to do more schooling? And I guess that that narrative kind of like shifts you into doing something you might not want to do. I
yeah.
just love the fact that you keep honing in on like this is your path, you do you what you want to do. So that is really really helpful. That's it for questions. Do you have anything else that you want
Okay.
to say?
Um, I think I would just say best of luck in navigating the path, and don't feel the urgency. I feel like when I was wrapping up at Queen's, so many people had acceptances to schools that sounded so impressive, and like I was still figuring my path out, and like it could be for you, but it couldn't just not be right now. And so kind of listening to your inner voice and making sure you're following your heart and your passion, that is what I would advise anyone to do. And I'm always here if anyone wants to talk about
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Caroline. Your
that. Of
words of advice
course.
are going to help so many people with applications and just like the general stress itself of law school and applying. Um, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.